My sister's new husband mocked my worn-out uniform at Thanksgiving dinner and bragged about his high-level government clearance. I pulled out my badge, looked him dead in the eye, and asked one question that made him freeze mid-sentence. Desmond had the turkey knife in one hand and my mother's good gravy boat in the other when he decided to perform for the table. "Renata, sweetheart, is that the same uniform from last year?" He said it warm, like a compliment, which was the worst part. You could at least iron it for a holiday. I had come straight from a 12-hour shift at the plant, badge still clipped to my belt, government gray polo still smelling faintly of the visitor lobby's industrial carpet cleaner, because my mother's Thanksgiving started at 4, whether I'd showered or not. I opened my mouth to say something flat and forgettable, the kind of thing you say to keep a dinner moving, and Desmond kept going before I could. "Some of us dress the part," he said, setting the gravy boat down like a mic drop, "because some of us actually need the clearance to matter. TSSCI, baby, full scope Holly. I don't get to talk about half of what I do." He winked at my nephew like this was a bit they'd rehearsed. "You'd be amazed what people don't know about their own family." Paige laughed the too-quick laugh of a wife defending a joke she wasn't sure was funny. My mother refilled the cranberry sauce like nothing had happened, and I sat there with a fork halfway to my mouth, 11 years into a career built entirely on knowing exactly what that sentence was supposed to sound like, and exactly how wrong it sounded coming out of him. "I'm not trying to be mean, Ren," Desmond added, already reaching for the wine like the point had been made and settled. "It's just some of us had to earn a certain kind of access. Not everybody gets handed a badge that actually opens doors, you know?" My face went hot in the specific, humiliating way it does when a room full of people you love is watching you decide whether to let something go. I could feel my own pulse in my ears. I set the fork down. "Who's your servicing FSO?" I asked. Just that, not loud. Desmond blinked. "My what?" "Your facility security officer. The person who processes your continuous vetting enrollment. If you're active TSSCI with full scope Holly, somebody at your company signs off on your periodic reinvestigation cycle. So who is it?" The table went quiet in that specific way. Rooms go quiet when everyone suddenly remembers what I actually do for a living. That's compartmented," Desmond said. "I can't get into the org chart with you." "I'm not asking about the org chart. I'm asking who your FSO is. That's not classified. That's a name on a form." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My nephew, 11 years old and delighted by any adult conflict, whispered, "Ooh," into his mashed potatoes. And my mother told him to hush. And Desmond picked the gravy boat back up like it might save him, and set it back down again because his hand wasn't steady enough to pour. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last Thanksgiving where Desmond got to be the most interesting person at the table for the right reasons. What happened over the next 6 weeks would end with me sitting across a folding table from my own sister on a Thursday morning, watching her decide, in real time, whether 14 months of marriage were worth more than the truth I'd brought her. I'd been a facility security officer for 11 years by the time Paige brought Desmond home. It's not glamorous work. I process SF-86 packages, I babysit visitor logs, I remind engineers 4 times a year that no, they cannot bring their personal phones past the yellow line. I wear a gray polo with a company patch on it, and I carry a badge that opens exactly the doors it's supposed to and not one more. My mother has never once described my job at a party without also mentioning that I used to want to be a lawyer, like the badge is a consolation prize. Desmond, by contrast, arrived in Paige's life the way weather arrives. All at once, impossible to plan around. He paid for the rehearsal dinner in cash. He sent my mother a Peloton for her birthday she never asked for and never used. He talked, vaguely and often, about consulting work for a group out of Reston that he was contractually forbidden from naming, and every single person in my family found that mysterious instead of suspicious, because he was charming in the specific way that makes people forget to ask follow-up questions. I asked follow-up questions. It's the job. I noticed he could describe his commute, a 9-minute drive, a reserved spot near the loading dock, in more detail than he could describe what he actually did once he got there. I noticed he never once said the word badge in, which is the first thing anyone who's actually worked in a secure facility says without thinking about it. Once early on at a barbecue at my mother's, I'd asked him, casually, over paper plates, the way you'd ask anyone, what agency his group actually supported. He'd smiled, said, "If I told you I'd have to marry your sister," and everyone at the table had laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all year. I laughed too. I noticed anyway, and then I told myself it was nothing, because Paige was happy, and the last time I'd voiced a concern about one of her boyfriends, I'd been uninvited from her birthday dinner for 4 months. Most of what I actually knew about Desmond in those first 14 months came in through the side door of ordinary life, the way real information about people always does. Not through any one conversation, but through the small, plot-irrelevant stuff that piles up when someone's around your family enough. He always parked crooked. He drank his coffee out of a chipped mug from my mother's cabinet that nobody else would touch, and somehow that became his mug within 2 visits. He complained more than once that Paige's downstairs neighbor's dog barked through his video calls, which struck me as an odd complaint for a man who claimed most of his calls happened somewhere he couldn't bring a phone at all. My mother kept a running grocery list on the fridge in her handwriting, and for a while there was a standing joke that Desmond's name appeared on it more than either of her actual daughters, because he was always over, always eating, always somehow the center of the kitchen. My own days, by comparison, ran on the kind of routine nobody writes stories stories about. I get to the plant at 6:40, badge in at the yellow line, check the visitor log against the day's expected escorts, spend most mornings buried in SF-86 packages and continuous vetting alerts that mean nothing dramatic 99 times out of 100, an address that didn't update, a foreign contact that needed a form, a reinvestigation flagged for something as boring as a missed credit card payment. I keep a chipped mug of my own on my desk, the plant's cheap drip coffee gone lukewarm in it by 9 most days. I didn't choose this job because it was interesting. I chose it because I'm good at noticing the one detail that doesn't fit the story everyone else is telling themselves, and because somebody has to be the person who checks. It just happened to be the exact skill set nobody in my family thought to be grateful for, until the one time it mattered more than anything else I've ever done at that desk. So I kept my mouth shut for 14 months. Through the engagement, through the wedding, a courthouse ceremony followed by a $40,000 reception my mother still didn't understand how Desmond had paid for, and through a slow, steady drumbeat of small, extravagant gifts that never quite matched a job nobody in the family could actually describe. Until Thanksgiving, when he made it personal, and I stopped keeping my mouth shut. Paige didn't speak to me for 4 days after dinner. When she finally called, it was to defend him. He gets weird about work stuff, Ren. You know that. You, of all people, should get why he can't just answer a pop quiz at the dinner table. I didn't ask him a classified question, Paige. I asked him who his FSO is. That's like asking someone their manager's name. Well, it felt like an ambush. A pause. Mom thinks you did it on purpose, to embarrass him. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that Desmond had embarrassed himself in under 9 seconds, and I'd just been standing there when it happened. I told her I loved her, and I let it go, publicly. Privately, I tried to fix it the boring, honest way first. I texted Desmond directly, 2 days after Thanksgiving, and asked if he wanted to just clear the air. No ambush this time, I told him, just a real conversation, one professional to what he claimed was another. He wrote back almost immediately, warm again, apologetic, said he'd been having a bad week and taken it out on me, said his firm was notoriously paranoid about even casual mentions of the work, and he'd tell me more once a contract renewed in the new year. It was a good text. It was reassuring in exactly the specific way a con works when it's working. I told myself I'd overreacted, that a man with something to hide doesn't apologize that fast, that I, of all people, should know the difference between someone being cagey about real classified work and someone lying about having any. I nearly let it go for good right there. Then I lay awake that night doing what 11 years of training had actually taught me to do, with an itch that wouldn't quite settle. I went looking for the paper trail instead of trusting the text. It took me 2 nights of scrolling to find it. Desmond had posted almost nothing about work. No photos of a desk, no LinkedIn updates, nothing that would normally flag as inconsistent, which itself should have told me something. But 18 months ago, before Paige, he tagged himself in a co-worker's post from some kind of holiday mixer. The caption said, "Team building at the office, love these people." The photo was grainy, cropped, taken at an angle, but Desmond was dead center. Blazer on, the same blazer he'd worn to the rehearsal dinner, smiling at the camera with a drink in his hand. Clipped to that blazer, catching the flash just enough that I couldn't have missed it if I'd tried, was a laminated orange visitor badge. I know what an orange badge means because I hand them out for a living. It means you don't work there. It means someone with actual access had to walk you in, walk you out, and sign a log with your name on it every single time, because the building doesn't trust you to be alone in it. 3 words were printed across the bottom in block letters. The same 3 words printed on every visitor badge I'd ever laminated myself. Escort required at all times. My stomach dropped the way it does at the top of a staircase you thought had one more step. 18 months ago, at the office he now claimed to run his career out of, Desmond hadn't been staff. He'd been a guest. I did not call Paige. I did not call my mother. I did the thing 11 years of training had actually taught me to do, which was nothing rash, because I know exactly what it looks like when someone with real access misuses it to settle a family score, and I was not going to become that story. Instead, I called Harlan. Harlan Voss and I had worked adjacent facilities for 9 years before he moved over to run visitor control at the Calder building downtown, the same glass tower Desmond had on 3 separate occasions described as my building, without ever once saying his employer's name. Harlan had 14 years managing badge logs and knew, better than almost anyone I could think of, exactly what an escort-required credential does and doesn't get you. "I need a favor," I told him over coffee, "and I need you to tell me if it's a favor you can't give me." I showed him the photo. I told him nothing about my own agency systems, asked for nothing that touched clearance databases, asked him only the kind of question any nosy relative could technically ask a building manager they happened to know. Had he ever heard of a guy named Desmond Callis working there? Harlan looked at the photo for a long moment, the particular long moment of a man doing math he doesn't like the answer to. That badge color's from before my time there, but the format's the same. Orange means escorted visitor, always has. If he's telling people he's staff, he's lying. Or he was staff somewhere else in that building and lost it. He turned his phone over, thought about it, then turned it back. I can pull public visitor sign-in retention. That's not protected. It's building security policy, not personnel security, and tell you if his name shows up as staff badge or escort badge. That's it. That's as far as I go for you, Ren, and you know why. I know why, I said. It's the same reason I hadn't pulled a single thread from my own systems, hadn't so much as opened a records request through my own agency's channels. Misusing Losing access to settle a family problem is exactly the kind of thing that gets your own clearance pulled. And whatever Desmond was, I wasn't going to hand him a matching story with my name on it. Harlan called back 2 days later, and I could tell from the first word that he hadn't enjoyed pulling the log. I ran it against retention records, sign-in sheets, badge assignment history, sponsor of record, the boring stuff building security keeps for insurance reasons more than anything else. Nothing that touches a clearance file. You clear on that? I'm clear on that. Desmond Callis had a sign-in history at the Calder building going back 3 years. 11 visits total, every single one under an escort badge, every single one sponsored by the same staff employee. He had never once held a staff credential there. He hadn't signed in at all in the last 13 months. Whatever he's telling your family, Harlan said, he hasn't set foot in that building since before your sister's wedding. I told Paige none of it, not yet. I wanted a second source before I put a bomb like that in the middle of her marriage, and I knew exactly where to get one, carefully, through the front door, without touching anything I wasn't supposed to touch. Priya Anand had been a personnel security specialist for 21 years, most of it doing exactly the kind of continuous vetting reinvestigations I process on the low-stakes end of the pipeline. We'd met at a training conference 6 years ago and stayed in touch the way people in a small, strange field do. I called her not as an FSO pulling a favor, but as a family member with a general question. The kind of question I told her explicitly that I needed her to answer only using public program information. Nothing case-specific, nothing that touched an actual record. Hypothetically, I said, if someone's clearance got revoked for undisclosed financial issues found in reinvestigation, not fraud, not a security violation, just debt they didn't report, what does that actually look like from the outside? Would there be a paper trail a family member could ever legitimately see? Priya laughed, not unkindly. You want to know if your brother-in-law's lying about his job? I want to know what it would look like if he were. She walked me through it in general terms, the same terms she'd have used in a briefing to new hires. Under Trusted Workforce 2.0, financial red flags, especially undisclosed debt, get flagged automatically now through continuous vetting, not just at the old 5-year reinvestigation mark. If someone's owed money to the wrong kind of people and didn't update their SF-86 to disclose it, and it surfaced in an automated check, an adjudicator could suspend or revoke access fast, sometimes in a matter of weeks, and the person loses their job at whatever contractor sponsored them, because no sponsorship, no billet, no badge. And here's the part nobody likes to hear, she said. Losing a clearance like that isn't usually loud. There's no announcement. The guy just doesn't have a badge anymore, and it's genuinely easier for him to tell people he quit to go consult than to explain what actually happened. I've seen it a dozen times. It's not rare. It's just quiet. Undisclosed debt, I repeated. Like what kind? Could be anything. Medical bills people are embarrassed about. Could be a gambling problem nobody in the family knows exists yet. A pause. You said he's asking your sister to put up her house for something? I hadn't told her that part. I'd let it slip without meaning to. Renata, Priya said, her voice gone careful in the specific way professionals get careful right before they tell you something you don't want to hear. Get her that money back before it moves. Whatever this is, get ahead of it. I got ahead of it 2 days too late. My mother called on a Sunday, chatty and oblivious, to tell me Paige had asked her to be a witness on some loan paperwork the following week, a bridge loan against Paige's condo, the one she'd owned outright since before the wedding, meant to cover what Desmond called a signing bonus gap before his new consulting contract kicked in, $42,000. My mother thought it was sweet that Paige trusted him enough to help. I didn't think it was sweet. I thought about an orange badge in a building he hadn't entered in 13 months, and I felt the floor tilt under me the way it does right before you understand exactly how bad something is. I spent the next 4 days doing the kind of digging that didn't require my clearance at all, the boring, legal, public kind. County court records are public. Judgment filings are public. It took one afternoon at a library computer to find what I was looking for. A civil judgment against Desmond Callis, 14 months old, for a little over $11,000, filed by a private lender specializing in markers extended at 2 casinos 3 hours from here. 14 months old, right around the time his last sign-in at the Calder building would have happened, if Harlan's timeline was right. I didn't need Priya to spell out the rest. Desmond hadn't lost his job to go consult. He'd lost his real lower-tier clearance because a routine reinvestigation had turned up gambling debt he'd never reported, and he'd spent the last year building a story elaborate enough to explain both his unemployment and his sudden need for cash, a story good enough that it had gotten him a wedding, a family, and now, in 6 days, $42,000 of my sister's equity. I called Paige that night and asked her gently to just look at some paperwork with me before she signed anything. She said she would think about it. Desmond called me 40 minutes later. I know what you're doing, he said, and his voice had lost every trace of the warmth from Thanksgiving. You've hated me since day one because I have something you don't. You're jealous, Renata. It's pathetic, honestly. A grown woman still competing with her little sister's husband over who has the better badge. This isn't about a badge, Desmond. It's exactly about a badge, he said, and hung up. 3 days later, at a family dinner I almost didn't attend, Desmond got there first. He waited until everyone had a plate in front of them, then set his fork down with the same theatrical care he'd once used on a gravy boat. I want to say something because I don't think it's fair to let it sit, he said, looking at no one but managing to seem like he was looking at everyone. Renata's been calling people at my old office, asking questions about me behind behind my back. I found out from a friend there that someone's been stalking the workplace," his words, and I think we all know who that was. He let that land, then softened his voice into something almost gentle, almost sad. "I get it. I do. It can't be easy watching your little sister end up happier than you expected. I just wish you'd come to me instead of going around me." Nobody at that table knew the word escorted existed, let alone that I had a photo, a name, and a court filing sitting in a folder in my car. All they had was a charming man in a good sweater, sounding hurt instead of caught. My mother looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Paige wouldn't meet my eyes at all. "I haven't been stalking anyone," I said, and heard exactly how thin it sounded next to his performance. "I've been asking questions because the answers don't add up." "See, that's exactly what I mean," Desmond said softly to the table, not to me. "Everything's always an investigation with her." I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the wheel the whole way, not from fear, from the specific, cold fury of watching a liar get to the truth first and repaint it as jealousy before I could even open my mouth. My mother called before I'd even gotten my coat off. "I don't know what's going on between you and Desmond," she said, "but you need to let it go, Renata. He's family now. Paige is happy. Why can't you just let her be happy?" I tried, one more time, to explain it in words that didn't sound like an accusation, that I wasn't jealous of a job, that I processed clearance paperwork for a living, and something about his story had never once added up the way a real one does. My mother went quiet in a way that was worse than yelling. "You've always had to be the one who's right," she said finally, and hung up before I could answer that either. I didn't sleep much that night. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to win this with a phone call. I was going to win it, if I won it at all, with paper. I called Solomon Reyes the next morning, a family and real estate attorney 18 years into practice, recommended by Harlan, who specialized in exactly the kind of mess I was describing over the phone before I'd even finished my coffee. "You're not trying to stop a loan," he told me once I'd laid it out. "Legally, you can't. It's her equity, her decision. What you can do is make sure she's deciding with real information instead of his information. Get her the documentation. Let her make the call herself. That's the only version of this where you're not the villain in 6 months, whatever happens." He walked me through what the bank would actually need to see before releasing funds, proof of the borrower's income, in this case entirely fictional, and the standard underwriting checks a loan like this triggers. On his advice, I called Carol Ibsen, the senior loan officer at Meridian Trust who'd been handling Paige's file, 11 years into her career and blunt in the exact way I needed someone to be. "I can't discuss specifics of an application with you, ma'am, you understand that," Carol said, "but I can tell you generally, bridge loans like this one get flagged for verification of the incoming funds source before disbursement. If the borrower's claimed employment doesn't check out during that verification, the loan doesn't fund. That's not me doing your sister a favor. That's just underwriting. So if his employer can't confirm he works there, then the loan stalls in verification, ma'am. It doesn't just proceed because everyone signed a form." For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than dread. Whatever else happened at that kitchen table, the money itself had a wall in front of it that Desmond's charm couldn't talk its way past. The only thing left to decide was whether Paige found out the truth from me in time to matter to her, or from a denial letter, after the humiliation of a stranger telling her what her own sister had already known. The signing was scheduled for Thursday, 9 a.m. at Meridian Trust. I went to Paige's condo Wednesday night instead of calling first, because some conversations you don't get to have over the phone. She opened the door already crying, which told me some part of her had been waiting for this exact knock for weeks. I laid it out on her kitchen table, the coffee table where I'd once helped her address wedding invitations, now covered in printouts instead. The visitor badge photo, blown up. Harlan's confirmation, in writing, that Desmond had never held staff access at the Calder building. Not once, not ever. Only escorted visits, the last one 13 months old. The county court judgment with Desmond's name and the 2 casino markers. Priya's general explanation of what a continuous vetting revocation for undisclosed debt actually looks like from the outside, which lined up beat for beat with a timeline Paige had never thought to build. He didn't lose a bonus, I told her. He lost his real clearance over a year ago for debt he never reported. Everything since then, the office he never goes to, the consulting nobody can name, this loan, it's been him trying to buy time before somebody noticed. I didn't want to be the one to notice, Paige. I really didn't. My voice cracked on the last word in a way I hadn't planned for. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in my head on the drive over, calm and clinical, the way I'd deliver a finding to a security manager. It didn't come out that way. It came out like a sister who'd been carrying something heavy for 3 weeks and finally got to put it down on someone else's table. She didn't say anything for a long time. She picked up the photo of the orange badge and held it the way you hold something you're hoping will change if you look at it long enough. Her hands weren't steady. Neither were mine. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed, and both of us flinched like it meant something. "The wedding," she said finally, so quiet I almost missed it. "He paid for the whole wedding in cash. I asked him once where $40,000 in cash comes from, and he said his firm pays consultants in signing installments for confidentiality reasons. I believed that. I stood up in front of 100 people and I believed that. You believed it because he's good at this, Paige. That's not the same as you being stupid." She laughed, one short, ugly sound with no humor in it at all. 9 a.m. tomorrow. I have to give Carol Ibsen an answer by 9 a.m. tomorrow. He said you were jealous, she said after a while. Quiet. He said you've never liked seeing me happy with someone who has more than you do. I know what he said. I kept my voice level, because falling apart wasn't going to help either of us at 10:30 on a Wednesday night with a 9 a.m. appointment bearing down on us. I'm not asking you to believe me over him because I'm your sister. I'm asking you to call the number on that court filing yourself. Call the badge office yourself tomorrow, before you sign anything, and ask them if Desmond Callis has ever worked there a single day in his life. She called Harlan's office the next morning, on speaker, at 8:15, 45 minutes before she was supposed to be sitting across from Carol Ibsen with a pen in her hand. Harlan told her, professionally and without a trace of pleasure in it, exactly what he'd told me. Paige didn't go to the appointment. She confronted him that afternoon, in the condo, with me sitting silent in the next room because she'd asked me to be there in case she lost her nerve. I heard the whole thing through a door I didn't bother pretending I wasn't listening at. Desmond tried jealousy first, the same script, worn thinner now. When that didn't land, he tried grief. His father's old business, a bad year. He was going to fix it before she ever had to know. He just needed time. When that didn't land either, his voice changed entirely, dropped the warmth completely, and what came out instead was closer to the truth than anything he'd said in 14 months, that he'd needed the money because the people he owed it to didn't send polite letters when a due date passed. Paige told him to be out by Friday. He tried once more, standing in the doorway with a duffel bag over one shoulder, to land the jealousy line on me directly, said I'd finally gotten what I wanted, said I should be proud of myself. I told him I'd settle for him just being gone, and he was, 3 days later, down to the chipped mug he took without asking, the last thing of my mother's he ever touched. I thought that would be the end of it. A marriage over, a lie exposed, a lesson learned the expensive way. It wasn't quite over yet. 9 days later, Paige's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, a collections agency this time, not a casino, asking politely, persistently, whether Desmond Callis could be reached at this number regarding an outstanding balance of just under $19,000, a second debt entirely, one none of us had known about. The $11,000 from the judgment hadn't been the whole story. It had just been the part that made it to public record. Paige forwarded the call to Solomon Reyes without comment and blocked the number. My mother called me the same week, and for the first time in a month, her voice didn't have an edge in it. I owe you an apology, she said. I told you you always had to be right. I think what I meant was, I didn't want you to be. She was quiet for a second. How long did you know? Long enough that I hated sitting on it, I told her. I wasn't trying to be right, Mom. I was trying to make sure Paige got to decide with the truth in front of her instead of without it. I know that now, she said. I just wish I'd believed you before the bank had to. Paige kept the condo. She had the locks changed the same week, and it took her the better part of the winter before she'd laugh at anything all the way through again. But by spring, she was hosting Sunday dinners of her own, and the first one she invited me to. She introduced me to her book club friends as my sister, who actually reads the fine print on things. I'll take it. It's not a bad thing to be known for. Months later, my mother heard through a cousin who knew a woman across town that Desmond had a new job, consulting, government-adjacent details he couldn't discuss. He told a new acquaintance at a dinner party that his sister-in-law worked some entry-level badge job and didn't understand what real clearance work looked like. I heard about it secondhand over the phone, standing in my own kitchen in the same gray polo I'd worn to that Thanksgiving, badge still clipped where it always is. I didn't call anyone about it. I didn't need to. Some of us dressed the part, he'd said, over gravy and cranberry sauce, like a badge was a costume for people who couldn't afford a better one. Somewhere across town, that same man was telling the exact same story to a room full of people who hadn't met me yet, and somewhere in that room, eventually, there'd be someone who asked him one plain question he couldn't answer. There always is, eventually, if you wait long enough for the story to run out of road. It just wasn't going to be me this time, and it didn't need to be. I finished my coffee, clipped my badge back onto my belt where it's always lived, and went to work.